Hello, welcome again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
I'm Bob Scarborough.
And we are the FAIRtax Guys.
Yes, indeedy do.
Indeedy do for sure.
It's been looking really good out in America. We've seen a lot of these two words together, fair tax.
Yes, well, we are finally in the news cycle. We have been ignored for 2 decades plus. The news people just didn't want to have anything to do with us. But now that the fair tax has been promised a floor vote in the House, a lot of folks are beginning to take notice of it for the first time. And so that's what we're going to do for the bulk of the program here on this edition of FAIRtax Power Radio. We're going to go through a lot of the stuff about the fair tax that you're not going to hear in the media, because the media, any publicity is good. But the media is generally not our friend on this. The media has been the friend of the political establishment, and we all know what the political establishment thinks of the fair tax.
Well, and that's true. And let me just add this to what you just said. You're going to hear some words that sound like the fair tax. You might hear somebody discussing the prebate. Will they give you all of the details to where you'll go, I understand that? Who knows? The best thing you can do is go to fairtax.org/FAQ. Send folks there, especially on Twitter. There's a lot of real-time commentary when the taxes issue starts coming up. Make sure you jump in there and just add, you don't need to get any argument with people or debate or anything like that. Just put fairtax.org/FAQ and the information is there. And thinking people, the folks that end up talking about this will end up being a benefit to have that particular link in front of them.
Okay. Well, this is the first time this year we get to dig into Congress.gov, and it's going to be a fairly abbreviated Congress.gov segment because, I want to get through these, and we want to get into the rest of the story here as quickly as we can. But I have found, believe this or not, if you put in the Internal Revenue Code in quotes in the search bar on Congress.gov and hit go, the Congress has been in session for less than 3 weeks. 36 hits come back on that search as of the date we're recording this, and 4 of them have already been inducted into the 2023 Tax Proposal Hall of Shame. I'm going to go through just those 4 real quick. They're actually quite related. All 4 of them are dealing with the same subject.
Yeah.
Three of the 4, I must say, are sponsored by FAIRtax co-sponsors, but these have nothing to do with the fair tax per se. So we're not
people that are supporting the fair tax too. They're
not saying anything bad about the FAIRtax co-sponsors. We'll look at that real quick before we get into the rest of the story as well. But here are the 4 that make the 2023 Tax Proposal Hall of Shame already, and start off with HR 381 to amend the Internal Revenue Code to update the definition of rifles and for other purposes. That's Bob Good in Virginia. HR 173, the Home Defense and Competitive Shooting Act. This is Representative Griffith from Virginia, to amend the Internal Revenue Code to remove short-barreled rifles from the definition of firearms and for the purposes of the National Firearms Act and other purposes. HR 152, the Hearing Protection Act. This is Jeff Duncan from South Carolina, to amend the Internal Revenue Code to remove silencers from the definition of firearms and for other purposes. And this last one, I tell you, it'll knock your socks off. Dig this one.
I'm ready.
This is another one from Jeff Duncan. The NFA, November Foxtrot Alpha, SBS, Sierra Bravo Sierra Act. NFA SBS. That's the short title. This act may be cited as the No Frivolous Application for Short Barrel Shotguns Act. And it says to amend the Internal Revenue Code to remove short barrel shotguns from the definition of firearms for the purposes of the National Firearms Act and for other purposes. So shotguns, rifles, and they are suddenly not firearms, and you have to define that in the tax code. Where in the twilight zone does that make sense?
nowhere in the twilight zone, and that's a big area. The twilight zone is big.
Yes,
And
it is.
nowhere does this fit.
Okay, well, I say that's going to be it for Congress.gov this time. We'll go into it a little bit more extensively next week on Fairtax Power Radio. I want to touch real quick on the co-sponsor situation. Of the 30 we had, of course, Buddy Carter, the original sponsor, and adding on to that 30 additional co-sponsors in the last Congress on the Fair Tax Act. Now, Buddy Carter is again the primary sponsor. And of the 30 co-sponsors we had in the last Congress, 5 of them did not return to this Congress, so 25 came back. Of those 25, 17 have already signed back on, and 9 have not quite yet. So actually, 8 have not. 8 and 17, yeah, 8 of them have not quite signed back on yet. 17 of them have. Not going to go through the whole list, but I will note that your Virginia Fox is on the list that was on last year and needs to come back on this year. You need to work on her. Now, in addition to the 25 that came back from last Congress, we have picked up 6 new co-sponsors, 4 of which were in Congress last year and did not sponsor the bill, but they are sponsoring it this year. At the top of that list is Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia. Right. And a couple of new sponsors who were not in the last Congress. These are freshmen. This is Mike Collins from Georgia 10. He replaced one of the 5 that did not return for re-election. And Eric Burleson, Missouri 7, was a new person in Congress who is now a co-sponsor on the Fair Tax. And so there we go. That's our co-sponsor situation.
Fantastic. Work on your representatives. And by that, I mean, give them a call and say, hey, I'm hearing all about HR 25. I really do appreciate your consideration of it, and hopefully you'll co-sponsor it too. Make those calls and tell your friends to make those calls too, because when your representative, when your staff gets, 10 or 15 calls about the same subject matter, they're going to sit up and take notice. So please make sure that you do that, and maybe you schedule a meeting with your representative when they come to the local office.
Well, let me give a shout out to Byron Donalds here in Florida. Last year, he was kind of a late comer to the party. We had to work on him a little bit, and he did finally sign on. He is one of the really early co-sponsors this year. So thank you, Byron Donalds. All right.
19, Florida District 19 there.
Absolutely. That is correct. Okay. Now let's move on to the meat and potatoes of this Fairtax Power Radio episode. I'm sure it'll take the rest of this one, probably all of the next one, and maybe even spill over into a third one. But
yes.
With the fair tax now in the public eye like it has never been before, and as we mentioned a minute ago, the media is now, starting to pay attention to us. And there are going to be things in the media about the fair tax that you just will not hear. And we are going to do our public duty here on Fairtax Power Radio and give you, as Paul Harvey would say, the rest of the story. Okay?
Absolutely. And this is a good one to keep in mind to share. Go ahead and share it now with some of your associates on the social media. And we'll get started, but this is one that you can always come back to for some information in detail. And let's get started.
Now, this is something that you'll hear in the media just in passing. They will mention in passing that the fair tax replaces the income tax, but they will not delve in to what that really means. Now, you can guarantee, I've already heard this, some people in the media are just recoiling in horror at the fact that, oh, wow, there's going to be this massive new tax on everything you buy. It's going to be so expensive you can't live because everything you buy is going to have, they're quoting it as a 30% tax. And that's the figure if you figure it as an exclusive tax. It's 23% inclusive. But even let's just use their figure. It's a 30% tax. And now they're going to say that's 30% tax is going to make your life that much more expensive. You can't afford it. And when you think about it, when the fair tax replaces the income tax, what's actually happening here is that the fair tax simply changes the point at which you are taxed from when you make your money to when you spend your money.
Exactly.
Okay? And when that happens, people working for cash under the table, people who, make their money by less than legal means and don't read Publication 17 and don't report the fair market value of the stuff that they steal, those people under the fair tax, under the fair tax, those people become taxpayers when they buy things. And when you've got a larger tax base that's raising the same amount of money for the government, I mean, mathematics says most people's overall share of tax burden is going to go down. We're going to change the point from which it's collected, but your overall tax burden for a lot of people is going to go down under the fair tax because it is going to broaden the tax base. I guarantee you will never hear that in the media. All you hear in the media is these guys want to put this massive new tax on everything you buy. And they don't tell you that they're just shifting the point at which you're taxed from when you make it to when you spend it.
That's right. And you're more in control of the spending side than you would be in control of the income, because you're going to make your money. You're going to get paid. You're going to get the net amount at that payday, regardless of what you're making, how much you're making. Now, once you get that money in your pocket, consider getting the entire amount without federal taxes taken out. Old age and survivors, the payroll tax, Social Security, etc.
Okay.
Point is that you will be able to be in control of what your tax is based on how much you spend.
Note also, people who will recoil in horror at the thought of a 30% sales tax have no problem with an income tax rate of 30% or even higher. And when you think about it, with the fair tax replacing the income tax, it's really not all that surprising that the rates would be similar.
Very true.
All you're going to hear about is this is a massive new tax. It's going to make everybody's life too expensive to live.
And people who are against the fair tax always somehow conveniently forget to mention that when the income tax goes away, so does federal withholding and the payroll taxes. People will bring home significantly larger paychecks without getting a raise. And it also helps the business owner at that point, because the part that he has to pay for half of your 15 point whatever the percent is, he doesn't have to pay that. So he might even give that to you, but he'll at least have that money where it doesn't cost him, and he's actually making a profit off of that as well, which is good. No more withholding from retirement distributions, investment income, lottery winnings, any other source of income. Think about that guy the week or so ago, whenever it was, it won the $1.3 some odd billion, and he netted out like 900 or 700 and some change after taxes. Could you imagine winning the lottery and not having to pay a dime to the federal government?
Yeah, not at least not when you get it. You can pay it when you spend it. But if you've got a big windfall like that, and you give some to your kids and you share some with your family, or you send some of your kids to college, no fair tax on any of that. You're only taxed when you make retail purchases. Right. So that's it. They'll tell you
capital gains, inheritances, none of that. You'll be taxed when and only when you make that retail purchase.
So you'll hear in the media in really quick passing, this replaces the income tax, but they won't tell you the rest of the story. Hey, when the income tax goes away, you bring home a much bigger paycheck. They won't tell you that. And they'll also conveniently forget to mention that when the income tax goes away, you never have to fill out another tax return. It's the tax filing season has just kind of opened. The next couple of months are going to be, where most of the tax filing takes place, and you'll get people doing this because can't figure this out.
Exactly. And the other side of it is the time that you spend during the year keeping up with, or if you do like I do, you throw it in a shoebox and you let the CPA handle it. But the point is that all that time and the stress and the concern, and it always starts to build right about now. and rolls all the way through April 15th and sometimes longer for some people. But that whole level of stress, the value of your health is so much relieved by moving to this consumption tax as opposed to the income tax. Internal Revenue Service going away, gone.
Yeah, people that are being interviewed in the media may, get into some of these points, but I guarantee there aren't going to be very many media people that will say, "Hey, look, when this passes, these FAIRtax people that are trying to put this huge tax on everything are also trying to get rid of tax returns." And I just love the fact that my personal finances are no longer the government's business when the FAIRtax passes. That's really cool.
Do you think some politicians use the specter of releasing of public figures, politicians especially, tax returns? Do you think that is a tool that the government, that our public officials use in some form?
Yeah, they do. But I tell you what, the tax returns go away. You get a bigger paycheck. And of course, the IRS goes away. If you will look in Section 301 of the current FAIRtax Bill, H.R. 25, that section of the FAIRtax Bill specifically disallows any more appropriations to the IRS after 2027. Now, I'm sure if this doesn't pass this year, they'll switch that up to the next year. But the FAIRtax Bill does indeed defund the IRS. And I imagine you'll hear some people saying, I have still heard them, well, this isn't going to get rid of the IRS. You're still going to need the IRS to collect this tax, aren't you? No, you don't, because the fair tax is collected by the states. It's actually collected by retailers. And retailers will remit it back to their state departments of revenue, which will in turn remit it up to the federal government. And another thing that they won't tell you, with the fair tax, no more tax enforcement activities will ever be taken against an individual. With the fair tax, the state revenue departments will deal with the retailers, the federal government will deal with the states. The individual is 100% totally, completely off the hook. There will never be another individual audit. There'll never be, well, I guess the state departments of revenue may audit some of the retailers to make sure that they're remitting what they should be based on their sales. But individuals will never again be targeted for tax enforcement under the fair tax, and you won't hear that in the media.
Well, and that's the thing. This is not a little ham sandwich, the fair tax. It's a fairly decent sized steak that you have to work on, and you have to really dig in. And that's, I think, the cursory look at it without a considerable amount of research and asking questions, because it's only 133 pages, but it's complex enough to where you have to rethink how that money is collected and where it goes and how it gets to where it's going and who benefits the most or who benefits the least. And we're going to talk about that as we continue with the rest of the story.
Indeed. I'll tell you something else that you will hear in the media, both from media people and from people that they're interviewing and talking about it. You will hear this, I can guarantee you. Hey, this fair tax thing just amounts to corporate welfare. You want to tackle that one there, bud?
Okay, well, of course, the idea that corporations must pay their fair share makes good political rhetoric, but it's an economic fallacy. We all know that corporations don't pay taxes. They pass these costs on to us, to consumers, to employees, to shareholders. Shareholders get it with a smaller dividend, possibly, or a lower price of stock. Customers, you're going to pay a nickel more, 2 cents, 3 cents, $1 more, based on wherever that tax impacts the corporation. The idea that raising taxes on corporations translates into lower tax rates for individuals doesn't mean that individuals will be better off. When you tax a business of any size, all you've done is increase the cost of doing business, because the business is just they're not going to go away, and they're not going to take it out of their profit necessarily. They're going to pass it on increased cost of doing business, labor, materials, taxes gets passed on to consumers. In the most part, to consumers, also to businesses, employees, and the shareholders. As we said, any break on taxes is offset by the higher prices that corporations charge when their costs go up. So when you hear a politician, when you see the hallowed halls of Congress and the microphones up there and the representatives saying, we need to stick it to the corporations need to pay their fair share.
No, all you're doing is raising prices for everybody, and you talk about hurting the poor. That'll do it.
Oh yeah, they're the component within our economy that can least afford just a small increase in whatever the cost is, and we're seeing that happen at a sustained rate. Fuel is fluctuating a lot. It has over the summer. It always does. In the fall and winter, different prices, different economic impact there on. But the food cost right now has been sustained at a level that we haven't seen in 4 decades, 40 years. And that's the challenge for folks right now. Is I've got this stack of money right here. I don't have a lot of it. I'm going to spend some of it over here. I got to have gas to get to work, but I'm going to have to, instead of buying this particular item, I'm going to have to do this. I'm going to have to get rid of whatever it was that I was paying for that cost me $10. I need that $10 to go over here and buy a hamburger now. And it is really difficult on the working poor right now. In a lot of cases, more than anyone else. Well, the corporate income tax goes away with all of this. The cost of doing business goes down dramatically with the fair tax for corporations. So it's beneficial to the economy as a whole. And sometimes you have to get up and fly 35,000 feet above, look at your situation, but get up and take a look at the big picture sometimes and understand what the benefit to corporations means to the rest of the economy.
Okay. Hey, that 35,000 feet reminded me of something. You remember a few weeks ago when we were talking to that crazy senator from Colorado? I think his name was Jade Wally.
Oh,
remember,
yes,
he was trying to he was trying to say that how much the income tax is better than the fair tax. Do you remember remember the look on his face when he asked him what happens to the price of airline tickets when the price of jet fuel goes up?
Yeah, that's right.
No, when you increase a corporation's or a business of any size, when you increase their cost of doing business, prices go up. It is just an economic certainty. Well, so all of this, so getting rid of the corporate income tax, which the fair tax does, indeed, that makes the cost of doing business dramatically lower. The free market, competitive pressures in a free market economy are going to force prices down.
Absolutely.
In that case, because think about it, not only if you get rid of the corporate income tax, not only does the tax liability itself go away, so do billions of dollars in compliance costs.
Oh,
think
man.
Compliance costs. Think that's what companies have to pay to hire tax attorneys and hire accountants and spend all the time and money it takes to maintain the meticulous records they need to support their tax returns. Those are currently costs of doing business. All of those costs are currently passed on to us, we the retail consumers, in everything we buy. And when those costs are no longer present, as I said, the competitive pressures in a free marketplace are going to force prices down when the corporate income tax goes away. It's an economic certainty.
And it won't add to the cost of doing business. The fair tax won't add on top of, because the fair tax is levied only on retail sales, Wholesale business-to-business purchases are not taxed. Manufacturers will not pay the fair tax when they purchase raw materials used in the production of their product. So you got a scrolling banner. It's going to be a piece of plastic here, some glue on the back, the squeegee stuff that goes like that. There's costs embedded. There's taxes and costs embedded in that. And the guy that has to put it together, his pay is embedded in the cost of that scrolling banner. and imagine that the raw materials that make this, there's no tax on it. So all of a sudden the cost is going to come down and make American-made products not only more competitive here in the United States, but also around the world.
And speaking of the world market, I mean, what happens when the United States becomes the tax-friendliest place on the planet to do business?
Yeah, everybody want to come here.
That's it. Companies that have moved overseas to escape the brutal taxation that we do on them today, they will come flooding back to this country and bring all of those outsourced jobs with them. The fair tax is the greatest jobs bill that could ever be imagined. And when that happens, demand for labor skyrockets, which puts upward pressure on wages and benefits. So people are going to benefit in just untold number of ways when the fair tax replaces the income tax, both the personal income tax and the corporate income tax. And we've only got about 2 minutes left, so that's as much digging in the rest of the story as we're going to be able to do. We will continue this on next week's FAIRtax Power Radio and possibly spill it over into the one after that, if you know, depending on how long it takes to get through this stuff. But really, folks,
this is wonderful information. This is wonderful information, and I think right now, while everyone's hot on the fair tax, and we're getting a lot of commentary and discussion and opinion articles, talking heads on TV channels and on Twitter, etc. This is a good time for everybody to do what I said just a minute ago and go to fairtax.org/FAQ and read it. And we are available, as are members of the Americans for Fair Taxation, which is the progenitor of the whole fair tax movement. We want to make sure that folks that have questions get the correct answers, get the answers from us. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors going on out there, and I've always maintained that people in Congress are trying to figure out how they're going to continue their gravy train in the midst of a revolutionary change like this. And I call it revolutionary, and you've heard some of the things today that will make it so, and how we can all benefit. But if you get up and look at your own situation and then take a ride up to 35,000 feet and look across the benefit across the whole economy, you're going to find a phenomenal opportunity. And my favorite part of it is it releases companies from the burden of spending time and resources on tax compliance and moves that to innovation and creativity. And the economy will explode at that point.
That's it. Well, again, share this video with your friends and family who may be just hearing about the fair tax for the first time. We will continue this discussion next week, but for now, this is all the time we've got for FAIRtax Power Radio. Thank you so much for watching and listening. I will remind you real quick, if you've got a question, you can send it to us at FAIRtaxGuys@gmail.com, or you can leave it as a comment on our YouTube stream or on our Facebook page as well. There are several ways to do that.
Absolutely.
But we'll answer as many questions as we can. But I say that is going to wrap up this edition of FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
I'm Bob Scarborough.
And we are the FAIRtax Guys, reminding you, as always, the fair tax is the only truly fair tax. And once you understand it,
you'll demand it.
So, how much will I bring home?
Go ahead.
How much do you make? We'll just say 40,000. Okay, keep it simple, throw out the deductions, all that stuff. So, you got your 40K, right? Now the first 8,000 is going to be taxed at 10%. The 8 to 33,000 is going to be taxed at 15%. And the 33 to 40, of course, is 25%. So that brings your total to $6,345.
Okay, so the average is what?
16%. Okay, and on top of that, you got Medicare, which is 1.5%, and then of course your Social Security, which is 6.2%. So actually, your new total is $9,405.
Which is
23.65%. You're getting it. You're getting it. Don't even get me started on what the boss has to pay. He's got to pay a portion of your taxes as well, so you don't have to.
Right. And you?